So, guys, I'm excited to share some stuff with you. As you guys know, I help a lot of my clients grow and scale, and as part of that, it's always begged the question. One of the things I love about technology is we can build, compile, and run things, and it's pretty black and white. And I think growing up as a developer, started really getting fascinated with what makes a good leader in technology. And what if we could have a leadership compiler? Oh, what would that mean? And if you kind of work backwards from there, well, to have that, you'd have to have some sort of standard. And it became very clear there is no standard. Like, what does it mean to be a good CTO? What does it mean to be a good technology leader? Everyone's got a different definition. And if you talk to a business stakeholder, they have even more different definitions, right? They usually just know when things are going wrong. Like, I smell something's up. I just don't know. But you ask the flip side, nobody knows what it is. And one of the issues in our world, but definitely in our industry, is this concept I call leadership debt. And it's much like tech debt, right? What's the worst thing about debt is when I don't know what I owe and I don't know how I'm going to pay it back. And you don't just wake up one day and decide you're going to rewrite a software application. It happens over time, a series of small decisions every day, usually happening at a lower level in the organization that we have no visibility into. So, what if we could attack it with some pragmatic ways? So, I thought that, we could talk about all sorts of technical stuff today. I thought today I just share some lessons around what I look for, how I establish those leadership baselines for myself and also for teams. And I know I've got about 15 minutes, so I'm not typically brief, so keep me accountable for that. I'll start with a couple things. One is, what are some of the values that I hold myself accountable to, but that I also look for when I'm looking at technology leaders, and then I'm going to talk to you about how I operationalize those values. There's one thing to establish the baseline; it's another to really talk through how am I going to use it every day. So, first value I look at is a sense of ownership. In other words, you want somebody who not only owns their territory, but they own the rest of the company. They have a sense of collective ownership over everything, and we hold all engineers accountable to that. I'm a big basketball fan, so I say, it's we're always in the game. We're not looking for fans. Like, can you believe that shot that Emad took? I can't believe that. We end up falling into that quite a bit, especially in technology when we're looking at other groups, at product or at biz dev, or look at those guys. They suck. What do they do? Just a bunch of happy hours? Like, we're the ones that do the real work, right? So it's really easy to be a fan in the stands. It's a lot harder to inject a mindset where, hey, we're all in this together. We're all accountable. At the end of the day, it's about what we can change. So that sense of ownership is key. One of the ways it plays out is in this talk about culture. Everybody talks about culture as this ambiguous cloud, right? The culture of the organization. And usually it's the culture sucks and it's this thing outside of us. We're all personally responsible for culture. So one of the definitions I give tech teams and I espouse is culture is just the stories you share every day. So if you spent your workday bitching and moaning about how difficult things are, congrats, that's your contribution to the culture for the day. If you spent the day trying to live out the values of the company and really trying to improve the customer experience, well, that's your contribution. And so part of this is, as leaders, is how do we take these ambiguous words like culture and accountability and all this stuff, how do we bring it down to a day-to-day definition that injects a personal responsibility on the team, from the leader on down. And one of the things that I think is key is how do we tie relevance to what we do. I think that's a huge challenge. It's a core human need, right? We all want to be relevant. We all want to work on things that are important. How do you build traceability, not just to the roadmap, but to the customer experience, and bringing in that relevance to the technology leaders? So we're building cathedrals, not laying brick, right? And one of the things I like to do is every now and again dedicate a sprint where our product owners actually relieve their duties and we give product owner duties to another group, usually a group that is as close as possible to the customer. For example, customer service team say, hey, for this sprint, your RPOs, We're going to be knocking shit out that customers are complaining about. And I'm going to tell you, it's not a scalable model, but every time I've done it, it has been revolutionary for the team. They see firsthand, a lot of times they don't even know a lot of the complaints that are going on with customers or the extent or the degree of them. I've seen customer service people that hate technical folks. And at the end of the sprint like that, they're our biggest advocates, right? You meet every morning, you look at it, you Kanban it and go, okay, what are we attacking, right? I had one guy once that said, he met with a enterprise customer every week. They complained about the same thing every week, never getting fixed because sales priority was on the roadmap, right? We're going to build features that sell. And during that sprint, we cleaned it up. And he said, I walked into that call and we had nothing to talk about for the first time in 6 months, right? So now you're building evangelists for your team as a result. So there's like pragmatic ways like that you can start to attack things. I think the other piece of that is, and this sounds obvious, but it's becoming less and less, I think, common on our teams, is we truly want engineers. So as leaders grow in technology, I think we often encourage leaders to spend more time on people, which is really important. I'm not advocating for that. But we also want to make sure that we don't lose the engineering mentality. It's actually a gift in leadership, right? Our ability to debug, to dig into root causes, to ask the 5 whys. A lot of people when they get into management, they lose that. Their knowledge, their main repository, source of truth are PowerPoints because we just don't have time. We're in meetings all day. So I always encourage, and I hold myself accountable to this as well. It's like, how do we make sure that we're grounding our leadership in firsthand knowledge and experiential knowledge? What I say with my tech leaders is, you earn a seat at the table, not with your opinion, but with proving what you have to say. Everyone's got an opinion. So don't come in the door saying, hey, I read this article, we should totally try this. Come in the door and say, I read this article, I tried it already, here's a POC, here's why I think it's valuable. That's a very different approach because it's based on experience. It's not based on opinion. So a big part, I think, of the job too is establishing a culture that's not based on opinion. It's based on experiential knowledge. Another example of that is when people, and I posted this on LinkedIn a little while ago, when people come in and challenge an idea, an approach, an architecture, say, oh, that'll never work because of X, Y, Z. And all of a sudden we're spinning up meetings to try to prove them wrong. And we're doing all this work and blah, blah, blah. I'm a big believer in the principle that whoever makes the claim has the responsibility to defend it. So if someone comes to the table and says, oh, Nathan, that'll never work. No way, no way in hell. Like, great. Can you show me why? So I just fire it back to them. Like, they have the responsibility. And the subliminal and not so subliminal message you send to the rest of your team is, I believe my team's time is precious. I will defend it. We will not just change direction simply because someone mouthed off in a meeting. They have to do more than that to get my team's time. My team's time is precious. And I will model that in everything I do, including in this meeting. So, and then you start to kind of build a culture of like, we've got to prove it. We've got to prove it because we're engineers at the end of the day. We eat problems for breakfast is what I say, right? It's like, we don't spend time on opinions and problem reporting. I mean, it's great to be aware of problems, of course, but the majority of our time is spent on solving the problem. So I think that's really, really key. The other piece is, everyone, I mentioned this accountability word, everyone talks about accountability. I like to bring it down to a level that people understand. It's got to be okay to challenge each other. So I'm going to share with you guys a little exercise I did with a team just to kind of set the tone and give you a sense of what that looks like. So I actually, in this case, this was a team of 50 people. We're all in the same room and all hands. And I put up big numbers on the wall, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And in this team, everyone was complaining about accountability. Oh, people are not accountable here, blah, 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 blah. Problem reporting, right? So I had everybody get up and stand under the number they think they are. 5 being you're the most accountable, like you're accountable for everything in the company. 1 is you have no accountability. Everyone kind of looked around like, what? Like, we're not just going to sit here and receive a presentation. So everybody lined up. It was like this like human bar graph. And I've done this over many teams, many years. Okay. Same pattern. Most people line up under 3. It's safe. The people that are really accountable, a couple of them will line up under 2, even though they're not really 2s. And then a couple kind of arrogant ones will go under 4. Nobody goes under 1 or 5. And I say, okay, look around. And then we go through a revision exercise. So I go one by one. And I've done this with large teams, I've done this with small teams. We go one by one. And let's say, I lined up under 2. I won't say me. Let's say Jose lines up under 2, right? So I'll ask everybody, all right, who agrees that Jose's a 2? Who thinks he should be lower? Who thinks he should be higher? And I actually ask why in front of the whole team. And if the majority of people believe that actually Jose's a 4, then we talk about why. Well, Jose did this for me and he helped me when he didn't have to, blah, blah. And then we physically have Jose move to a 4. And I physically calibrate everyone until everyone's calibrated. And the exercise is a bit in your face. Sometimes I get chuckles when I first start it. But what it does is it sets the tone to say, it's okay to talk about this. And it also puts it in everybody's face that you have a certain self-concept of yourself on the team that is very different than what the team actually thinks of you. And more often than not, it's actually more positive than what you think of yourself. People kind of tend to think when they hear about this exercise, it's a shaming exercise. It's actually very encouraging. But I do things like that to kind of bring truth to the surface, right? Like, let's not just talk about accountability and complain that we don't have accountability. Let's really get into it. What are we talking about here? So I think doing things like that is important. I'll share another pragmatic example, and I'm trying to focus on more of the pragmatic things that I'm doing, so that you have good takeaways here. And I have so much more to say. I could talk for hours on this, but I'm trying to keep it really short. So another pragmatic thing I do, we all do retros on our teams, right? With sprints, right? So establishing the baseline of what makes a good leader. Well, we talked about ownership, we talked about experiential knowledge, we talked about this accountability thing. One of the ways I operationalize it is at the end of every sprint, as part of the retro, we do a very quick fist of 5, and rate the team's leader against the values. So we go, okay, ownership. In this last sprint, how would you rate Mech on ownership? And people go 5, 4, 3, whatever, right? And it's nothing that goes in a performance review or anything like that, but it's a feedback loop that now we're showing that we're serious about these values. You will be held accountable. The leader will be held accountable against the team. And now going to the next sprint, So guess what you're going to be trying to do? Get better ratings, right? So that's just one example. There's all sorts of things I do like that, where how do we bring the values to action, where leadership is constantly being evaluated beyond the 360, beyond the performance review, beyond a once a month, conversation and a one-on-one, in front of the team. I'm a big believer in doing things in front of the whole team, to set the tone. Let's see. So I'm just looking at my notes here. So we talked about ownership. I think another piece of this is what we're going through right now, and building trust. With the remote workforce, it's a lot harder. And for us as leaders, it exposes our leadership gaps. And a big part of it is setting the tone with building trust. That's a number one thing. And I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. But one example of that I want to share is, that employee that is super skeptical, maybe bitter, constantly bitching and moaning about stuff. Those are the guys you go after in a good way. So they have passion. They care. There's energy there. The worst thing you can have on a team is indifference. There's nothing you can do with indifference. You can't teach someone to be more energetic, But if they have a hate or a love on your team, I love the skeptical misfits on teams. I love them because I was them. And I'll give you one quick story and then I'll stop here. I walked into one client engagement. You know, I like to do one-on-ones with every team member when I start an engagement. So I did that, built an initial strategy, presented it. I'm being all inspirational. I'm like, here's where we're going, everyone. Isn't everyone excited? And there was this one guy, happened to be named Joel. Um, and he was super skeptical. He raised his hand in front of 100 people and said, "You know how many times we've heard these words from previous people? What makes you think you're going to do anything special here?" And basically, I said, "There's no words I can tell you to convince you. Trust is not built with any response here. It's through action." And in my one-on-ones with him, in teams, he was constantly challenging me. How are you going to measure that? How are you going to measure your success? He's just drilling, right? And he used to always wear these shirts that had these like really sarcastic messages. So people would see him and, some would laugh, but most people were like, "Oh, that's bitter Joel, again." But in my one-on-ones with him, after all that passed, at the end, he would just say, "What do you need me to do?" Like he really he believed in it, right? And we went through a whole series of things, but I paid a lot of attention to him. We sat down together, we started talking through ideas. What ideas does he have? He's like, "Well, here are the ideas that have never gone off the ground here. This is why I get pissed. Like I have this idea to improve the architecture, this idea to improve the back end, blah, 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 blah." Anyway, fast forward, that was 4 years ago. He's now their head of technology, and he's in a very different place. And that's not to toot my own horn, that's to toot his horn. But it also shows that as leaders, we have a responsibility to optimize the value of our people. We too often look elsewhere. We look outside, we look to outsource, we look to do this, we look to do that. We have hidden gems in every one of our teams. And it's our responsibility to do the work and the due diligence to dive in and understand, like, what kind of shot can I give this person that would make them grow, right? That's my responsibility, is to bring it out of them. So I have a lot more to say and many more stories, but I'm just going to stop here. And if there are questions or anything that has struck you, um, we can go from there.
Yeah. So my question on the human bar graph exercise, you talked about the promoting some of these guys. Did you ever demote people where the team is like, "Oh no, that's not definitely a 3. That guy's a 1," or something like that?
Oh yeah, that has happened. And
Yeah.
boy, what an uncomfortable, awkward silence in the room. Okay. Um, a big part of it in a lot of the examples, I won't say it happens all the time, but in a majority of the times where that has happened, it's been because there's a team member that everyone knows is not performing, but for whatever reason is not being held accountable, or not being managed out, or whatever it might be. And all of a sudden it's exposed to everyone. Like everyone's looking around at each other going, "Oh, you feel the same way too." And it sort of breaks some of the cycle too a bit, because especially if that person has a lack of self-awareness, like you almost can't deny the situation anymore. So it's resulted in action, all sorts of different types of action. But yeah, I've definitely seen that.
Oh yeah. So one of the things I try to practice is give like negative feedback, kind of privately, and then uh, as opposed to publicly, where people just the effect is really intense for the person receiving the negative
Yep.
feedback. Um, have you seen anybody improve after like they've been like called out publicly like that?
Very few.
Yeah.
I think it's hard in general, even if you're privately on a PIP or whatever it means to come back from that. I will tell you though, it's you know these are tools in the toolbox,
Mhm.
and not every tool is good for every situation. We have to assess it. I don't do the accountability bar graph with every team. It's really with in situations where, it's been a long time running. There's been a ton of feedback going on, yet very little action against performance. You have to kind of assess what's the right situation. So I'm totally with you on, hey, let's try to handle this privately first. But yeah, very few have turned it around. I would say maybe 10% of the folks that called out are actually turning around. But when they do, it's powerful. It doesn't happen often.
Yeah, and identifying just the self awareness, and then the other team's awareness of the pariah. I think it's pretty positive. I
Yeah.
definitely would want to see it in action. I don't know if I'll have the opportunity soon, but yeah, sounds like a pretty good technique.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And it's also like it's hard. It's going to take consistency over time, but setting the message that it's okay to have this conversation. Like nothing's going to happen to you. It's feedback, or we're going to set the tone. But it's really hard to establish because people have a distrust. Like the minute they hear negative feedback, it's like, oh, this is my job. Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Have you found that providing your own kind of self-critical kind of feedback is helpful, like modeling that to others and being like, hey, in this sprint, this is what I could have done better. Here's how I could be more accountable, to kind of show like this isn't about, me yelling at you. It's about us being honest with each other.
It's a great question. I think the short answer is yes. So I've always shared my own constructive criticism from teams, my 360 results, all sorts of stuff, right? Open to the entire team, like, and say, all right, well, here's the feedback. Here are my blind spots. Here's what I'm committed to doing. So I think that's great. Leading from the front is great. I will say, I lean towards that, and I think that's important. I think something else you have to keep in mind as leaders is some people take advantage of that vulnerability. So you kind of have to walk the line a little bit as well. But I think overall it's worth the risk.
Have you seen any challenges in doing the calibration that it could be different than the overall culture of the company? For example, like we really gear on having a safe space and negative feedback is on one-on-one only. I know that some of your approach is it's almost like future back vision where you want the future now and you accelerate the time span.
That's right.
Which I think is very exciting. But how do you navigate like comments from, say, the E group or the board of directors? Hey, I heard that you're doing this really intense discussion. How do you navigate that sensitivity with your upper managers?
Very delicately. So I think if it's not the culture of the executive team, you want to start small. For me, the reason you hit the nail on the head, Mac. The reason why I accelerate it is oftentimes in engagement, I don't have a lot of time. I'm there to make an impact right away. So that's a function of just the consulting role itself. But, obviously with a full-time role, it's a little bit different. But I think that if the executive team does not align, you want to start small. Grab a couple leaders and do it together, right? Start there and then grow it and grow it and grow it. And part of this, we didn't really talk about this one, and I think this is a whole nother topic, which is our responsibility as tech leaders to communicate value. Part of this is communicating value back to the exec team and owning the story. So as you're doing it and you're starting small, lead the story from the front. Go to the exec team and say, let me share some wins with the team. We got together. You don't even have to share the tactics themselves. You could just say, hey, we got together this week and through some honest conversation, we're able to come up with this solution. Just want to let you know, right? And you start a cadence of wins to the team. So by the time they hear about the tactics, it really doesn't matter. So I think taking control of the organizational story is important as well.
Yeah, if you show results often, that gets accepted.
That's right. That's right.
Emad, I was just reading in a book called The 12-Week Year. They talk about accountability, and they make a point that accountability is not, you can't hold other people accountable, that accountability is a sort of intrinsic self-driven mechanism. And I wonder if you had any thoughts about that.
As in what? It starts from the individual? Was that the argument?
Yeah, that we don't actually have the control over other people to get them to like insert our will, right? So they have to accept that that's like a value of the organization and figure out what it means to live it. You as a manager can't hold somebody accountable. And we always talk about that, like, oh, I hold people accountable, but it's not really it's not necessarily accurate.
I think that's right. It's sort of splitting some hairs philosophically. So I do agree. It's got to start with us as individuals. I do think, though, that you can't change someone's behavior. What you can do is set a standard for what's acceptable for the team. And you let the standard speak for itself. So it's almost like you're a steward of that standard, right? So you say, okay, well, from now on, if you break the build, you've got to do X, Y, Z. That's just a standard. and sort of separate yourself from that. But I agree, from an individual human standpoint, yeah, it starts with us. But I also think as a leader, you have a responsibility to set the baseline of what do you hold people accountable to? And the secret sauce is when everybody holds themselves accountable to that standard where you don't have to get involved because the standard is clear.
One more question?
I'm just thinking about one of the helpful in-between states, and maybe it's not in between, it's just to get you there, is peer accountability, because there's something extremely powerful when your peers hold you accountable, which is
I love that.
kind of what Emad's exercise actually draws out, right? It's like getting it all on the table. So it's not just you holding, because some people respond to manager enforced type accountability and others don't, but peer accountability, it's a huge success when your peers are holding you accountable.
I agree 100%.
And you almost have no choice but to either internalize it or leave.
It's almost like building that peer-to-peer network of accountability.
I like the retrospective, just a impromptu rating. Everybody
Yep.
rate somebody, and it's like, oh man.
Yeah, and that's just one example. There's many things you could do like that informally, but it shows that this is a living, breathing thing on the team.
Yeah.
What is your tactic or suggestion on how to give people strength if they will rate a low score from their peers? So the first time hearing that would be probably discouraging for some. How do you foster that attitude of being humble and strive for improvements continuously?
It's very difficult. I think a lot of people, especially engineers, take constructive criticism either they reject it entirely or they take it really heavy and personal. Like, I totally suck. I'm going to lose my job. So I don't know which one you're asking about. Maybe you're asking about the one that's totally rejects it. Is that what you're asking about?
I'll pick the one that you've seen the most.
Okay. Yeah. The one I've seen the most is people take it really hard and personal. I've seen some of the totally rejected as well. So I think part of that is you're gonna have to spend some time on really being very clear about how do they come back? How do they get back to a performance level? So what is that baseline? Usually unfortunately we acquiesce that to HR and say, all right, well, it's whatever the job description says. That's a losing battle right there. I think as a technology leader, you have to be very clear. Like, I need you to do these 3 things. And the more specific they are, the better. Like, hey, on this project, what I'd really like to see is this. I'd like you to see this, do this. And then actually, I even sometimes will pair them up with somebody that they can trust, that's helpful. I also like to look for a quick win for them that shows them that you're invested. Something small, like for example, I might have shared this in another meeting, but there was one client that they couldn't get whiteboards on wheels approved. I think I shared this, and like, go after that, right? And it just so happens someone on that team was on a PIP, right, as well. So show them that you're invested. You can. All it takes is one thing. You don't have to show them every day. But setting a clear standard and then showing that you believe in them, sorry about that, guys, I think helps a lot. And then having them come back to you on a weekly basis, on a regular basis, like, how we doing? What challenges did you face? Let me help you work through this, is important.
Emad, thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you for having me, guys. I appreciate it.